Thank you. This is our third episode for a series of 6 episodes, which is just enough JavaScript. And in the series of these 6 episodes, we're going to go from like a blank canvas to a deployed app. We've already made some progress with what we are trying to build. So we are building a simple mood quote application, which is if you provide your mood, it gives you a quote for that mode instantly. So it's a very simple application, but it has the fundamentals of how to build modern web apps today. So if you understand the bare bone structures of how this can be built, you can like the skills are repeatable and then you can do it to build your own applications. We'll recap from the previous episode. Um, Last time we covered like a big picture mental model of what the web app architecture looks like, specifically for our app and just modern web apps in general. And we used coffee shop as a metaphor to understand what modern web app looks like. So your mood input for this application or any user input is like the coffee order you place at the coffee shop. And then your UI trigger is like the cashier who will do this transaction for you. And your API route is like an interface between your front end and back end, which also means in terms of the coffee shop, like a barista who will make your coffee for you, but you have to specify exactly what you're asking for. So in our application, the database would be for the quotes database that we will favorite all our quotes or just like the general database. And then in terms of coffee shop, it will be the ingredients needed to make your coffee. And our output is like our beverage, but that we get like a latte or a mocha at the end of the transaction. And this applies generically to any modern web application as well. And in our code last time, what we looked at was in this application, our source code has one file called layout.tsx, and it sets up the structure of our web page. So let me quickly show you layout.tsx. So if you look here, this is just an HTML page. But inside the HTML page, we have a body, and then we have the theme toggle and this children props. So children essentially means anything you put under the body is part of children. So every UI component we've used is inside here. It's passed as a property. So the purpose of the layout file is essentially just to provide structure to our application. Our components folder is like the input button and the card. So these are just like UI components that we use. So if I go back here to our code base, I can see the components folder has a badge, a button, a card, input, spinner. So these are just like specific UI components, which is analogous to our coffee ingredients. And um, the last important thing is our API route itself. So for now in our code base, we have two API routes, one to favorite a quote and the other one to like generate quotes. So this one is a get request and the other one is a post request. So last time we covered the difference between get and post. So if you look here, this is the prompt we used on the left to favorite a quote. And just a brief summary of what get request versus post request means. A get request is used to retrieve something from the data. In our case, it happens to be a quote. And a post request is used to send something to the server. So think of it as like in our case, it's favoriting a quote or anything that you want the system to remember for you. It's a post request. But if you want to access like real-time data from the system, it's a GET request. So this was a brief recap from last time. The learning goals for today is understanding web design basics, JavaScript essentials to be able to read code well, and why AI tools prefer TypeScript over JavaScript, and understanding how fetch works, because this is the main function that makes the API calls for us to fetch quotes for us. So in terms of web design basics, the first thing to keep in mind is everything on the web is the layout is done in terms of boxes. So I'm going to zoom in on this page. So if you look here, this is just an example web page, but the whole page, if you see, is divided into boxes. So every box is a div, and div is short for division. And if you look here, the heading has a div for itself. The subtitle has a div for itself. The button has a div for itself. The whole thing is organized into one big div, which has nested divisions inside of it. And then this is simplicity, like just at scale. So if you want to think of it in terms of Figma, everything is kept inside a frame, and frame directly translates to div in the code base. So other keywords that you use in JavaScript is a section. So a section is a labeled group of boxes. Like if you look here, everything is a div. So this logo and icon is inside a div. These nav links are inside a div. This call to action is inside a div. But the whole header is inside one big div, and it can be qualified as a section. So a section can have multiple divisions inside of it. And everything else are custom UI components, like a button or an input or a card. So in our case, if we want to go back to the code base and the server is running, and if I have to show you, so these UI components, these are specific components, but if I want to show you what exactly it looks like in code, so this is our page, and this would be a button, and then this card is a UI component. So individually inside this card, there are multiple divs, if you see. So there is a div for the card footer. There's a div for the card content. There's a div for the call to action inside the card. There's a div for the card description. There's a div for the card title. And then there's a div for the card header. So it's just what's inside the div is not super important to know at this point, because that will mostly be generated by the AI component for you. But it's important to know that everything is divided in terms of divs. So you have one overarching div and then nested divs inside of the card component. And so section will not explicitly be used sometimes, but div and sections can be used like interchangeably. So let me look if we have a section in our code base. So yeah, see, there's no section, but if you want, you can change it. You can like, it's easy to change anything to a section and the code would still work. It's just like a different way to label things. But most of your work will be done with divs. And just to understand this better, let's ask our agent in ask mode, what is the difference between div and section?
While it's generating, Junaid,
Yep.
I know there's a tendency of being slow at the beginning and super fast towards the end.
I know, yeah. It'll generate so much code for me super fast, but when I ask a simple question, it'll take forever.
Yeah, it's warming up. It's warming up.
Right. Yeah.
I have a question about here because I saw you using the ask mode, and I assume
Hmm.
it's the similar with if I were to ask the question in, let's say, ChatGPT, something
Right.
else. So in other words, it's consuming uh, the usage, but just like to a very minimum degree.
Sorry, I did not understand
In
the
terms of
question.
the data usage, because
Right.
assuming we are on the free plan of Cursor, but you
Right, right.
task mode, it's like it's very it's very like token saving, but it will still consume some of the token.
Right, right. I mean, it would be useful when if you're using ask mode inside the code base and if you have the cursor has the context of your documentation and your code. So that way the responses of the agent will be more personalized. Whereas in ChatGPT, if you're on like a web ChatGPT, you'll have to provide context of why you're asking the difference between div and section, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Um,
And this is, I'll go back to the slides if this does not work. Yeah, okay. Um, so yeah, div is like a generic container, it says, and section is for grouping. So it's it gives us like examples as well. So like if you look here, it gives us the layout for an example container which has rows and columns inside of it. And then section can be like a group of elements. So div is an element which has nested elements inside of it, but they're all divs, so it makes sense to use divs. But if sometimes you have like an H2 tag and a P tag, then you would want to use section. But it's not like using one over the other is right or wrong. It's just about if you have labeling and grouping, which like from a perspective of theme makes sense for your application to call it section, then you should just do that. But what you look, what it would look like in the UI will still be the same. So that's a brief summary of it. And next up, we have the core essentials for JavaScript. So if you look here, variables are used to name things that you want to reuse or work with later. One key, so this is the syntax of JavaScript where there is uh, a keyword that you use, const. Const stands for constant, and this is what I like, what which is arbitrary. We can name it anything, but it makes sense to give your variable names that are specific to your application. So happy is a mood, so I've named this happy. And the semicolon is like a delimiter. So Python does not have a semicolon, but JavaScript does. So it's just rules around the language. And so that's variables. Let me show you an example of variables in our code. So any file, let's see. So it has used const as the keyword, and then here it's doing some destructuring, but it's essentially naming it quote. And if I go to another API route, it has const as the keyword, and then it's named the variable quotes, and then we have one object inside which we have a list of elements. So like these square brackets and these commas, it's you don't need to know exactly what the syntax is doing, because if I remove something, then it's immediately going to tell me that it's missing something, and it's going to say an error. So this is not necessarily an error in your code, but it's a syntactical error. So if I ask the agent for a quick fix, it just fixed it for us. So you don't need to know exactly what the syntax is, but like a general idea of this is the keyword to name variables. This is a name that makes sense. This is how you assign value to it. And then you can create an object. If you have a list of elements, you can use that. Next thing is functions. So like what's happening after the assignment here will make sense after I show you what functions are. So functions are like like little machines that repeat steps for you. So we have a function here called get quote. So the keyword here is function and all lowercase get quote and then parentheses. And it's taking a parameter inside of it, which is our mode. And it's getting us the quote on the basis of the mode that we provide. And these curly braces are just to signify that all the statements written inside of these curly braces are the steps that need to be executed. So when I say return stay positive, what happens is it's going to print in the console stay positive. So it's just return just ends the code for you. So that's usually the last sentence in a function. So let me show you in our code base what it's like. So here, if you look, we've used, so get is a function. So if you hover over get, it's going to explain to you what it's doing. So it returns the first value associated with the given search parameter. So we're searching for mode, and then this is another function to convert it to lowercase. And then if you want a random quote every time, it's using the math library to generate a random number. So all of this is just being done by the AI agent itself. We did not write a single line of code, but the thing to remember here was we used variables and then we called function when it was necessary. So the dot random function is the function that generates a random pseudo number between 0 and 1. And then it displays as a random quote. So in our case, if we go to our function and then hit get quote on com, we'll get a random quote every time. But that is because, and then you have the choice to favorite it. So let's see where the favorite function is. So if you look here, log is also a function. So it basically prints it out, favorite quote in the console. So once if I hit get quote, the API is being called, and then it printed the favorite quote in the code base. So console.log, it just prints anything you want in your terminal. And the last important thing is event listeners. So event listeners are basically for anything you click on the UI, you want to perform some user action. So if I click on a button, I want to do something. So here what's happening is on click handle get quote. So this handle get quote is a function call. So let me show you what it looks like in our code. So let's see an on click event. So what's happening here is if I click on a button has an element of on click, and on click is a mouse event. So if you hover over it, it's going to give you all these details, but what's important is a mouse event handler. So on clicking a button, handle get quote, call this function. And if I want to go to this function, I'm going to hold command on my keyboard and just click on that function. And then it'll take me to that function. And it's just going to show me what this function is doing. So you don't need to know the details of these functions, but all you need to know is what function to call when an event takes place. So you just need to make sure that the right function is being called. So if you look here, this is a different button. So this is the favorite button inside the card. If you want to favorite a quote. So if there's inside the button, there's an on-click element. And if you want to handle the favorite function, if you click on this button, you'll hold the command key and then click on the function. It will take you to that function. And then it will show you what this function is doing. Again, not necessarily required at this point to know what this function is doing, but just what you need to know is what happens when you click this button. If you want to click this button and you want to handle how favoriting a quote works, make sure it's mapped to the correct function. And so one key thing to notice is TypeScript and JavaScript is pretty much the same language, but TypeScript is just JavaScript with safety. So let me explain to you this example and maybe you'll understand it better. So this is the first line here. Const stands for if you want to declare a variable. So const mode equals happy. If you look here, you're attaching a string here. A string is just a character, a bunch of characters. So this is what works. But if you assign a number, it will also work and it will give you no warning. But TypeScript provides you with the option of using these colon operators to specify a type for your variable. So const mode, it's informing the code base that you're expecting a string always. So it's going to check that does the string on the other side of this equal sign have quotations around it. If yes, then it's right. But if you are explicitly mentioning that you're expecting a string but assign it a number, then it's going to catch it and it is going to show you an error. So let me show you an example of this and how TypeScript catches it. So this can be done in any file per se. So let's do it right here. Const mode, and I'm going to say string, and I'm going to say happy. So if you look here, it gave us it's giving us an error. So if you declare 1, 2, 3, it will also give us an error. So if you're going to specify string, you have to put quotes around it. And this error is because of the scoping error. So we've already described mode here, so you cannot describe mode again. So let's change it to something else. Test mode. So now it's working because it has quotations around it. But if I remove the quotes, it's telling me that type number is not assignable to type string because we've clearly mentioned that this is going to be a string, but we're assigning it a number. So if you want this to work, you either have to put quotations around here and make it a string, or you have to change the type here and call it number. So that was the difference between JavaScript and TypeScript. And why TypeScript is better than JavaScript is because the AI agent likes when you specify, the more you specify, the smarter the responses are. So it's essential to mention type after every keyword. Even if you don't mention, it will still expect it to be JavaScript, but it will not do the type safety for you. Um, so this is just a resource that I have used myself uh, over the course of the past few years to understand JavaScript and TypeScript better. It's one of the best courses I've taken online, and it explains, like, it's a very comprehensive course. It's like, I think it's over 20 hours, but it gives you everything you need to know about TypeScript. And TypeScript is the language of the web. Every browser you use is built on TypeScript. Every modern web application has TypeScript in it. So this course will be a good resource if anyone is really interested in diving deep into learning how to code. Um, the last thing for um, today is understanding how fetch works. So fetch is the function that actually gets us our quote from an API call. So how it works is you simply send a request, and request in this case means like an HTTP request, which is basically asking the web for something. And then once you get it, you update it to the UI. And think of it like this, that once you have a front end and back end, and fetch is the common interface between your front end and your back end. So let's see how this looks in code. So if you look here, we have fetch. So this is our API call that it's making, but it's using fetch. And so fetch is the keyword to make any API calls from the code itself. So if you look here, fetch is also a function. And you don't need to deeply know what fetch stands for, but fetch is just making an API call to to the URL we set.
This is boring. So you're keeping track of each job application description.
I think someone's mic is on. Is it? Okay. Okay. Yeah, so fetch is making the API call for you. So that's the primary purpose of fetch. And the key takeaways for today are how to use divs and sections and like simple HTML to understand how to build everything. You don't really need to know specific code information to be able to build, but just understand that if you can divide the web page into boxes and then it can have nested elements inside of it, that's good. Variables are just if you want to name things and reuse them. Functions are repeatable actions you can perform and steps you can take. Event listeners are simply listening for UI trigger events from your user interface. When you click a button or when you hover over the button, that's also an event. TypeScript helps you to catch errors before you make them, and your application is much more safer and easier to build. And fetch is primarily used for API calls. And the next three episodes are this, but let me show you briefly what we will be um, needing for the next few episodes. So this is our application, which is essentially the same as last time. you get a quote, you favorite it, and it's saved, but it's right now in our local. To save it in the database, we will be using what we call Supabase. Supabase is an open source database that can connect to from your web app, and you can save your resources directly. It has like just enough storage for any hobby application. It has APIs, and that everything is real time, and it integrates well with our application. So we're gonna do this in the episode itself, but it would be helpful if you want to just download it ahead of time. GitHub is what we're going to use next time to keep track of our application and save our code somewhere. So it's for saving, it's for planning, and it has inbuilt Kanban style structure to, if you're working on a big project, it's included uh, where you can move things from like one task to another to be able to collaborate better. And it also has like you can tag people line by line and collaborate on code and make decisions. So GitHub is a very useful resource. So right now for our API, we have like the routes in place, but we don't have like these are hard-coded quotes, but what we want is the quote generation to be handled on an outside source. So we're going to be using quotable.io. So if you look here, let me send a link of this in the chat. So this is a quote generator API. It's free and open source. You don't need an API key for it. It will basically get us quotes from this API, and then we can use it in our code base directly. It has quotes sorted by author, and it has tags in it, so we can provide, it will nicely fit with our use case where we want like a mode to be mapped to every quote. So this is a good resource to have. And yeah, I think I'll just share GitHub and Supabase as well. It would be helpful to sign up ahead of time next time when we work on Supabase and GitHub. And yeah, so we're going to do version control with GitHub, APIs, quotable.io, Supabase to save things in the database. And then we're also going to be using Vercel to deploy our application. So Vercel is also an important tool. So if you look here, Vercel is like connected. Once you deploy on GitHub, it will like automatically get connected to your GitHub code base, and then it will just like it's just a one-click deploy. Like you can just deploy your application in seconds. You just click once, and there's no shipping routine. You just click once and it's deployed on the web. So yep, I think that was the plan for next 3 episodes. And like all the links I've mentioned in the chat are also available on this free guide. And yep, I think that was it for today. If we have any questions, we have 5 minutes. No, Git is just there is no difference between Git and GitHub. Git is the technology which is providing version control to us. GitHub is a platform. So you just need to install GitHub, and then everything else will be taken. Just like go to GitHub, make a profile, and then you should be fine. If we need Git in our terminal, we can do it like live during the lecture.